To see you here. As we gather this morning, may the sanctuary be a place of refuge, a place where we can lay down the slings and arrows of everyday life and feel held by a community that cares. Here we find comfort, renewal, and the quiet strength that comes together. And may the peace we find in this hour inspire us to do our part in shaping a kinder, more compassionate world. Braxton, would you please light the chalice while we recite the written words? May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. We now enter the time of joys and concerns, a practice rooted in our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. As we share, may we honor the essence of each story and the humanity within us all. If you have a joy or concern you'd like to share, please grab the mic, turn it on, and please share with us. Joys and concerns? Okay. Jen?
Good morning, everyone. I'm just joyful that it's summer. I haven't been here because we've been busy a lot. Last weekend we were in Ithaca for a long week camping, and we joined a new homeschool co-op, and Emerson, we've done to meet greets, and Emerson's been really enjoying that. And then there was a boys club for 5 to 10-year-olds, and last week they made they used PVC and made marshmallow guns, and they ran around the yard playing and stuff. So it just makes me happy that he's having a good summer and I'm having a good summer. And I read that book, Thundering Waters, and that threw me in a loop for a while. But then I joined the Clean Air Coalition, so now I'm feeling a little bit better about that. I'm going to get an air filter, and I'm feeling a little better about that. But yeah, that had me down for a couple of weeks after I finished that book. But yeah, summer's going well. I just spent a couple of days at the cottage, and Abby last week was my birthday, and I had two book clubs, and Emerson got to spend the day with Merge, and yeah, summer's going well, so it's a joy. Thank you.
Are there any other joys or concerns?
Also, I wanted to say, I went to grad school for international studies, and I'm very excited to hear this speaker today, because this is right up my alley. I remember international law class, and I was very critical. It was good. I'm just interested to hear today.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce the esteemed Craig Gerard Mohkiber. Craig is an international human rights lawyer and activist, and a former senior United Nations human rights official. A human rights advocate since the 1980s, he went on to serve more than 3 decades at the United Nations, with postings in Switzerland, Palestine, Afghanistan, and at UN headquarters in New York. He has undertaken dozens of human rights missions across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. In 2023, Craig left the UN after issuing a widely read letter urging the international community to confront human rights failures in the Middle East and to embrace a framework grounded in international law, human dignity, and equality. We are honored to welcome him today.
Thank you very much. I'm going to need that. Thank you. Is this working? Can people hear me? Yes? Yeah, I turned it on. I'll also try to speak loudly. I don't know where we are on the technology. I can see we're doing our part for the environment here, so I'm going to take this jacket off. It's warm, yeah. You know, I have this dream of someday, it's so nice to be back with all of you, and I have this dream of someday coming here to speak about something happier. The problem is that when you make your career in human rights, it's often a very dark conversation, and the world is not all bleak. We just heard some blessings a moment ago, and you know, someday I'm going to come up here and say things that don't make me a dark cloud on your Sunday. But sadly, we're living in a moment in history when that is increasingly difficult to do. And that's why, you know, I really enjoy these conversations with all of you. It's just an opportunity to be in this historic church, first of all, but also to be with you as you reflect on these questions of faith and your own spiritual traditions, but also, as is the Unitarian Universalist tradition, on the human experience itself and on the deprivations and inequities and injustices of our societies, and I think most importantly on the moral responsibility of all of us to speak and to act for justice. I know that's an idea that's explicit to the humanitarian creed, and I know that at this moment it really matters, more than ever, I would say, at this moment. We've watched for 3 years now. We've watched it together. I was here very early on in these horrors in the Middle East as a live stream genocide has raged in Palestine, supported by our government, paid for with our tax dollars, and covered up by our media corporations. While our neighbors, even here in Niagara Falls, have either looked the other way and what I think is a disgraceful moral abdication, or in some cases, cheered the slaughter openly. It reminds me very much of the reality of Hannah Arendt's banality of evil. I don't take for granted these days the courage that it takes at this moment in history in particular, when powerful forces, including the US government, are systematically attacking all who dare to challenge the lawless tyranny of our government and of the Israeli regime, and all who dare to stand for truth at a moment when the truth is being criminalized in this country, and for justice when injustice seems to be the official orthodoxy. And I think even your presence here today, at a moment when dissent and the truth itself are being criminalized, is a signal that you will not be co-opted, that you will not be intimidated, and I hope that you will not be silenced in speaking out for justice, especially at moments like this. So I am really, truly grateful to be in conversation with all of you today, because we are speaking at a moment of extraordinary darkness. From Khan Yunis to Beirut, from Tehran to Havana, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Caribbean, and from New York to Los Angeles, there is a cloud descending on humanity. As I speak, there is a violent axis that's rampaging across the globe, committing acts of serial aggression, destruction, and yes, genocide, kidnapping leaders, stealing resources, destroying civilian infrastructure, murdering innocents, and dismantling institutions of law and diplomacy. The two highest crimes in international law since the Second World War, aggression and genocide, are being perpetrated in broad daylight, day after day, month after month, over and over again, while the perpetrators boast of their crimes and arrogantly dare us to try to stop them. This is what I have called the US-Israel axis. It is, in my view, a marriage made in hell, merging the arrogant lawlessness of the US administration with the violent racism of the Israeli regime, and merging the latest technologies of surveillance and murder with seemingly limitless impunity. Mark my words, if we do not confront it and stop it, that hell is coming to the doorstep of each and every one of us. Already today, the world is recoiling in horror as the Israeli regime, armed and funded and protected and accompanied by the US, rampages across Western Asia, leaving a trail of blood and destruction from the Mediterranean coast to the Persian Gulf and beyond. As it perpetrates genocide in Palestine, aggression and war crimes and crimes against humanity in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, in Iran, and beyond. Unlawful occupations of Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, and assassinations all across the region. as it corrupts governments and institutions across the West, first and foremost here in the United States, as it persecutes human rights defenders wherever they dare to challenge the Israeli regime and its myriad crimes, or the deeply racist and fundamentally violent ideology of political Zionism upon which it is constructed. But there is another assault happening as we speak, perpetrated by the US and its Israeli partner with the complicity of its proxies and its Western sponsors. That is the assault on international law, on international institutions, and on the very idea of human rights. The scope of this assault is unprecedented. In its sights are the rules of international humanitarian law, the norms of human rights, the UN's human rights mechanisms and committees, the UNRWA and humanitarian agencies of the international system, the judges and prosecutors of the International Criminal Court, also under attack, the International Court of Justice, human rights organizations everywhere. And hear this, we too are in its sights. Now, I know this church well enough to know that this includes everyone in this room, everyone who dares to put principle in the path of power, everyone who refuses to go along with the growing tyranny that defines our age. Just a few weeks ago, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, in a statement that was more cartoon villain or schoolyard bully or mafia hitman than statesman, announced the intention of the Trump regime to accelerate its attack on the International Criminal Court and to dismantle it, quote, brick by brick. A duly constituted international court established to bring accountability under the rule of law for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, openly targeted by our government to protect a genocidal foreign regime. This is the sound of open criminality, and it is the echo of impunity. But it is foremost a warning that the beast cannot be appeased. It must be confronted and defeated. Because fascism, let me say the word, fascism loves law and order, but it despises the rule of law. And this, because of this unprecedented assault on the rule of law, we should all be paying very close attention on the patterns that are emerging nationally and internationally, and it should send a chill down the spine of anyone who cares about justice and human rights. It is a truly extraordinary moment in history, one of existential challenges. But the seeds of this assault are not new. They are as old as Israel itself. The year 1948 that saw both the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that declared that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That year saw also the adoption of the Genocide Convention, prohibiting genocide and setting out a plan to prevent it and to punish it. That presented a very promising moment in history, that all human beings would have their human rights respected and that an international system would be constructed to ensure that. It promised an end to systematic state oppression, to colonialism, to institutionalized discrimination, and to genocide. But in the same year of that promise, 1948, the horror of the Nakba and the creation of the Zionist regime of Israel over the ruins of Palestine occurred. That was more than just a historical coincidence. It was a birth of a virus, the virus of the Israel exception to international law, shepherded in by an unholy alliance between the forces of Western imperialism, white supremacy, European fascism, classical anti-Semitism, ancient Islamophobia, and ascendant political Zionism. Together, these forces declared that the lofty promises of the newly printed UN Charter and of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights may apply to some privileged others on earth selectively, but certainly not to the indigenous people of Palestine. They were to be shunted aside, displaced, and erased, all to make way for a new European settler colony called Israel. That one fundamental breach of the stated rules of the new post-war era, that original sin of the United Nations, has haunted us now for 80 years. And it has brought us to an era of expanding darkness in which we now all find ourselves. It laid the foundations for a wall of impunity that was continuously buttressed by the US, the UK, Germany, and the broader West for 8 decades. Through massacre after massacre, war crime after war crime, ethnic purge after ethnic purge, atrocity after atrocity. Its first victims have been the people of Palestine, still suffering from a century of oppression, imprisonment, torture, murder, displacement, apartheid, and genocide. But we know that impunity is a voracious beast. The more you feed it, the hungrier it grows. And so the Israeli regime, with full United States backing, did not stop there. It turned itself on the people of Lebanon, Syria, of Yemen, of Iraq, and of Iran. It targeted UN workers in Gaza, humanitarian flotillas on the high seas, journalists on their beats, medics in hospitals, and just for sport, children in their schoolyards. But still unsatisfied, its proxies and sponsors and pro-regime harassment cells here in the United States and in the broader West have turned their attacks on our students protesting Israeli apartheid and genocide on college campuses, on protesters in cities across the globe, on workers organizing in their unions, students expelled, professors fired, workers blacklisted, migrants deported, protesters arrested, politicians smeared, all for opposing the world's first live-streamed genocide. And for its part, the international legal system established since the Second World War has struggled to respond effectively. Parts of the system have all but collapsed entirely, either in the face of Israeli organized campaigns against them or in the trepidatious and shameless deference to power of perpetrator states like the United States, the UK, and Germany. Israeli spy agencies, Western governments, Zionist harassment cells acting on behalf of the Israeli regime have all been ruthless in their assault on the international legal system. They have intimidated, harassed, and publicly smeared international officials. They have imposed unlawful US sanctions on the ICC prosecutor and the judges of the court. They've imposed those sanctions on a range of prominent international and local human rights organizations. They've imposed them on the courageous and principled United Nations Human Rights Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese. Almost 3 years into the genocide, the United Nations Secretary General, cowed by Israeli intimidation and bowing to Western power, has failed to even utter the word genocide. And his senior-most political staff, including the Secretary General's own advisors on children in armed conflict, on sexual violence, they have resisted speaking out long into the genocide. And his special advisor on the prevention of genocide, cowed and instructed to be silent, has been almost entirely silent throughout the genocide. Some of these officials even became complicit in the crimes of the Israeli regime by non-critically echoing its fabricated genocide propaganda. The Security Council, blocked by the US veto, has been entirely useless and wholly discredited by its inaction in the face of this historic crisis of humanity. Brought to its knees by the US and the Israelis and the West, it has even gone so far as to pass a resolution that was entirely ultra vires, beyond its own power, and unlawful under international law, endorsing Donald Trump's King Leopold-esque colonial scheme in Gaza, which has been dubbed in the most outrageously Orwellian terms, the, quote, board of peace. Let me declare today, beyond any reasonable debate, that the UN Security Council, not the UN, but the UN Security Council is dead, destroyed by its own hand with the blade of lawlessness and with the poison of cowardice. And the United Nations General Assembly, which includes all states and no vetoes, despite some important initiatives that they have done, codifying the orders of the International Court of Justice and finding the Israeli occupation entirely unlawful, has nevertheless failed to use all of the powers available to it under the so-called Uniting for Peace mechanism, as it did in the case of apartheid South Africa, to circumvent the US veto in the Security Council, to isolate the Israeli regime, to declare sanctions and a military embargo, and to reject its UN credentials, as was done with South Africa. And it has failed to establish an international tribunal to hold it accountable, or even to reestablish the UN's anti-apartheid mechanisms to address Israeli apartheid. We must demand that it does so, this and more, because if it does not, and if you care about the idea of a United Nations, you should know that the UN will not overcome these stains on its record, or these blows to its legitimacy, which may show themselves to be fatal. And so it should be. If at this moment in history the UN bows to power instead of standing on principle, it will be of no use to us, or to generations of people who, since the end of the Second World War, have worked so hard to build a system of international law and international diplomacy, determined to prevent the kinds of atrocities that terrorized humanity in the years of World War II and before. But there is light. The UN's Human Rights Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, has stood up to the organized campaign against her, despite the smears and the death threats and the official US sanctions that have been posed in an attempt to silence her. In doing so, she has been a light in a moment of extraordinary darkness. So too have the people of UNRWA, the UN's humanitarian agency in Palestine, stood tall, bringing honor to the UN flag, relief to the communities that they serve, and hope to all of those who still believe in humanity. And they have done so despite an organized smear campaign, despite cuts to their funding by genocide complicit states, despite the detention and torture of countless UN staff, and the murder of almost 400 of them since October of 2023, many along with their families. But the wall of impunity that's been built up around the Israeli regime is beginning to crack. Not because of any saviors from above, but because of you and millions like you standing up around the world to challenge this tyranny. Your voice can help to isolate the regime and to punish all who are complicit in its crimes in both the public and the private spheres. Today, the Israeli regime is on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. Its occupation of Palestine has been declared entirely unlawful by the ICJ. Its leaders are indicted for crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court. It has been found by international institutions to be guilty of apartheid, crimes against humanity, and genocide. In the face of tremendous pressures, Special Rapporteur Albanese, the people of UNRWA, the humanitarian agencies, the judges of the International Court of Justice, principled in humanitarian and human rights staff at the UN, have not bowed and have demonstrated the truest principles of the United Nations in their steadfast and courageous example. And while governments sit passively by, or worse, march along to the growing drumbeat of fascism, the people are standing up in their millions, and that movement is growing every single day, as it must. There is so much at stake in our struggle against these horrors. Palestinian lives and dignity, the lives of millions across the broader region, the rights and freedoms of people here in the West. The system of international law carefully built up for over 8 decades. So I believe we are duty-bound to oppose this, to let them hear our voices in the halls of diplomacy, in the corridors of the UN, in the international tribunals, in our schools, in our churches, in our mosques and synagogues, in our places of work, in our unions and on our streets, to denormalize US imperial violence and the ravages of the Israeli project and end these horrors, to stand in solidarity with Palestinian steadfastness and resistance, to work for boycott and divestments and sanctions, to seize the media and educate our neighbors on what is truly happening, to expose and prosecute the perpetrators, to mobilize and demonstrate and engage in direct action, to speak and to act in our communities to end impunity and to bring redress to the victims and freedom for Palestine. And remember, the Palestinian people are on the front lines of defense for the lives of millions. for the very idea of human rights and international law, and ultimately for the rights and freedoms of all of us. We abandon them to our own detriment. Of this, I am sure. Now, some have tried to hide from the growing drumbeat of fascism as it echoes across Palestine in an orgy of extermination. Some looked away as it thundered over the border into Lebanon and Syria and Yemen, in Iraq, in Qatar and Iran. And as the Axis extended its unlawful and brutal aggression in Somalia, Nigeria, Venezuela. Many simply covered their ears as it moved closer westward into the Mediterranean Sea, where humanitarian ships were targeted one by one. They shrugged when it roared into the Caribbean, where boaters were blown out of the water in a series of extrajudicial executions in broad daylight. A head of state and his wife kidnapped at gunpoint in Venezuela, and the island nation of Cuba placed under a brutal siege simply for refusing to bow to imperial tyranny. And even today, some look away as the US government, acting on behalf of the Israeli regime, targets people within its own borders, college students and professors, human rights defenders and peace activists, journalists and dissidents and leftists and Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims, right here in the United States. But those who have ignored this bloody fascist crawl across the globe, those who have refused to hear the cries of the Palestinian people or the Lebanese people or the Iranian people or the Cuban people, those who have ignored the attacks on the UN, on international judges and prosecutors, on international human rights defenders, on leading Palestinian human rights organizations like Al-Haq and Al-Mazan in the Palestinian Center, those who would downplay the mafia-like threats of Marco Rubio to dismantle the International Criminal Court, those who think they can retreat into infantile nationalism or dismiss the very importance of international law and international justice altogether, and those who refuse to hear the decade-long warnings of brutalized indigenous, black, and migrant communities here in the US itself. They're having a rude awakening today because the imperial boomerang has come home once again. The danger is here, and the call is coming from inside the house. Many of you will know that the imperial boomerang is a phrase used to describe the reality that colonialism and white supremacy and militarism practiced abroad will ultimately come back home as fascism. It's the idea that governments that use repressive techniques to oppress peoples in colonial territories will eventually use those same techniques domestically against their own people. It's an idea that originates with Aimé Césaire, a black writer and thinker from Martinique, in his 1950 work, Discourse on Colonialism, where he used it to explain the origins of European fascism and Nazism in the first half of the 20th century. Césaire pointed out that the methods used by Hitler and the Nazis were not unique at all, except that they were used against white people. Because all of those horrific practices and all of those tactics were first used by the West against colonized peoples in the global South, causing millions of deaths and untold suffering for decades, indeed centuries. And the same tactics and technologies and ideologies today used to oppress the Palestinian people are now appearing on our streets, on our campuses, and in our workplaces. The proof of this is everywhere around us today. The repression, the violence, the racist bloodlust, the silencing of dissent, the enthusiastic support for genocide, the masked, armed men sent by the government to break down doors in the middle of the night and gun down our neighbors in the middle of the street. With each successive crime committed by the US empire, the Israeli regime, or its complicit allies, their desire for blood and conquest expands. It has spread across Western Asia, across the Caribbean, and is now spreading across the United States itself. And with each successive step, it moves the red lines further and further over the boundaries of human rights and of human decency. We allow it to continue unchecked at our own peril. And let us recognize this: if genocide is not a red line, there are no red lines. Look around you. mass incarceration and privatized prisons in the US overflow with black and brown bodies under the control of for-profit corporations that hone their skills on Palestinian bodies under the Israeli regime. And they are supervised by prison guards trained by the Israeli regime. ICE agents and FBI agents and militarized local law enforcement trained by notorious Israeli police agencies are using the same brutal, racialized, and unlawful tactics on our neighbors for which the Israeli regime has been universally condemned. Decades of the US underwriting of apartheid, of surveillance, of repression, and of genocide in Palestine is now being brought home with the brutal persecution of our students, our protesters, and others opposed to the horrors of the Israeli regime. It's brought home with the distortion of US legislation by Israel and its government-adjacent proxies in this country, in the official adoption of the so-called IHRA definition designed to silence dissent about the Israeli regime, in the full suspension of the First Amendment of the UN Constitution on behalf of this foreign regime, on the criminalization of speech critical of the regime, the proscribing of boycott and divestment and sanctions despite constitutional guarantees in this country, and especially by the corruption of US law enforcement with a constant flow of Israeli weapons and equipment and surveillance technology and intelligence and training and influence via Israeli regime proxies in the US. Technology notorious for its brutal and abusive use on Palestinians. Militarized tactics that have been condemned everywhere else outside of this country. Tactics designed not for civilian protection, but for killing and maiming. Israel's so-called counterterrorism tactics, surveillance, brutal crowd control, racial profiling, intrusive intelligence gathering, mass surveillance and data extraction technology from Israeli companies like Cellebrite and Paragon Solutions to access our personal data. That alone should terrify every American. But the Israeli regime is exporting more than just weapons and technology and tactics through all of these activities. It is exporting a violent and deeply racist ideology, extremely right-wing, thoroughly Zionist, militarist, and anti-human rights. And it is deeply anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, and anti-Palestinian. An idea that the targets of law enforcement are not a population to be served and protected, but that they are the enemy. They are terrorists, and they are not entitled to any human rights. These are ideas that resonate deeply and find fertile ground in some law enforcement agencies right here that were founded historically as slave catchers and left to terrorize communities of color for centuries. The idea that people must be contained, silenced, crushed. And what people should know is that these training exchanges and the feeding of these horrors into our law enforcement is being done with a full collaboration of organizations right here in the US. And that today, for example, the DHS and ICE have official offices in Israel for this collaboration paid for with US tax dollars. So already thousands of US law enforcement, including high-ranking ICE and Border Patrol and FBI executives, have traveled to Israel since the early 2000s for this indoctrination. And they have been now unleashed on our communities with terrifying effect. These are the domestic echoes of our country's exported horrors. The home front reaping of a poisonous crop sowed thousands of miles away and fed with the toxic fertilizer of impunity. What this tells us is that the liberation of Palestine and Lebanon and of Cuba and of Venezuela from tyranny are all inextricably linked to the liberation of our own communities here in the US and across the broader West from oppression by the same forces. That we must free our own institutions and societies from racist and imperialist forces. That we must break the trajectory of the imperial boomerang. Because Palestine will not be free until we are free, and we are not free until Palestine is free. Beyond this now familiar slogan, it truly is one struggle. And let me close with this. Left to its own devices, the repressive arm of the state pulls in only one direction. And we know that both major political parties in this country are agents of the same oligarchic power structure, with barely distinguishable ideologies of exceptionalism, corporatism, neoliberal economic policy, neoconservative foreign policy, unbridled militarism, imperialism, and Zionism. And both parties have committed themselves to serving as the loyal guard dogs of the concentrated power of the billionaire class that truly rules us. The Thiels and the Adelsons and the Ellisons and the Zuckerbergs. In sum, Epsteinian oligarchs who command their political underlings in the Congress, in the State House, and in the White House to continuously feed Wall Street, to feed the military-industrial complex, to feed the Israeli regime, and to feed their own pockets, while starving the people, both literally and figuratively, of food, of healthcare, of education, of decent infrastructure and decent jobs, of access to the truth, and of justice itself. The precedent since the 1960s of mass deprivation, followed by the race-based mass incarceration of the so-called drug war, followed by the systematic abductions and torture and extrajudicial executions of the so-called war on terrorism, and now followed by the silencing and police beatings and expulsions and firings and arrests and incarcerations and deportations of people simply for speaking out against the apartheid and the genocide of the Israeli regime, all with the complicity of the media corporations, the Wall Street robber barons, the Silicon Valley dystopianists, the Israel lobby, and the war machine. Each of these has represented ever-expanding ripples of repression. And no Congress and no president, Republican or Democrat, has worked to reverse any of these abusive trends. Rather, each has helped to entrench and expand them either for cash payoffs from their donors or for their own nefarious purposes. As a result, I believe we are now spiraling rapidly down into a dangerous vortex of fascism. All official checks on abuse of power have been weakened or entirely dismantled. And there is no force on earth that can or will stop this decline but us. It won't be easy. The struggle is real, the obstacles are daunting, but we are obliged to try. Because with every passing day, the slumber of the people is being exploited by the designs of the oligarchs and their systematic implementation by a captured and servile ruling class bent on the consolidation of their own power and wealth. Our job here in the belly of the beast is to awaken a nation that is sleepwalking into fascism, because the hour is late and the threat is real. Let me finish where I started with Aimé Césaire, who also taught us, and I quote, "When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty." This is our duty, to rebel, to challenge this repression in every way we can, to stop the slide into barbarism and then to reverse it, to draw a red line in the sand against imperialism and fascism, and for human rights, for equality, for peace. Victory is never guaranteed, but defeat is certain if we do not fight back. I know the struggle is hard, I know the night is dark, but I am not here with a message of despair today, because I know something that Trump and Biden and Netanyahu and Smotrich and the fascists and the Zionists and the oligarchs and the corporations and the lobbies don't know. I know that we are going to win, because they may have the corrupt governments and the surveillance software and the guns and the drones, but we have something much more powerful. We have justice on our side, and we have the people. People rising up in record numbers from Buffalo to Minneapolis, from New York to London, from Rafah to Beirut, and from Johannesburg to Sana'a. Despite the persecution, despite the repression, the threats, and the smears, we are here, and we cannot be silenced. Together we can tear down the curtain that they have put up to obscure their historic crimes. We can and we must stand in solidarity with those that seek to destroy. We can demonstrate, speak out, educate our neighbors, support boycotts and divestment and sanctions. We can support prosecutions in courts of law. We can support direct action and civil disobedience, to expose their propaganda, to vote them out, to break the bottom lines of their corrupt corporations. We can shame them. We can hold them accountable. Most of all, we can declare to the world that these crimes are not in our name. And this all must end. So today, here in our own communities, on our streets, we have to say no more. No more repression here at home. No more persecution of our neighbors based on their immigration status or their race or their gender or their religion or political opinion or sexuality or gender identity. No more war on Iran or Venezuela or Cuba or Yemen or any of our other sisters and brothers all around the world. No more colonialism or apartheid or genocide in Palestine. No more imperialism abroad. And no more fascism at home. Together, we really can free our communities, and in doing so, help to free the world. We can stop the imperial wars. And if we can awaken the conscience of our country and the world, one neighbor at a time, we will see a free Palestine in our lifetime. And we really must not relent until it's so, because their struggle, truly, is our struggle. Thank you for listening. Thank you. I fear I probably spoke too much. I don't know if there's time for questions. And,
if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, happy to be in dialogue with anybody who wishes to. Please come. Is there a moderator, or am I just
I heard this morning on the news that Donald Trump is now $4 billion richer than when he came into office. And it's also infuriated me that CBS systematically eliminated Stephen Colbert, who was a staunch, I don't know how to say it, but
a liberal
critic against Trump.
Yeah.
And also Norah O'Donnell on the CBS News was eliminated. They tried to eliminate Jimmy Kimmel, but fortunately the people spoke out only because they boycotted Disney. And so then I heard too that Israel has been trying to goad the United States into war for years against every president that's been in, and Donald Trump was the only one that caved. So I don't know if that's accurate or not, but...
You know, I think a part of the machine that has brought us into this very dangerous moment in history is the corruption of our own government. That we have, long before Citizens United, but on steroids since Citizens United, become a country that has a government that is for sale. And it's not, if it were only Donald Trump, it would be an easy nut to crack, but it's our members of Congress, it's our senators, it's people in the state houses and so on. Our politicians are for sale. People describe Donald Trump as a transactional president. The old-fashioned word for this was corrupt, that you could receive personal benefit and financial benefit and praise and, you know, airplanes and God knows what else in return for policy. And that has been understood by powerful, wealthy forces, both in this country and abroad. You mentioned CBS. CBS has been purchased by the Ellison family, a billionaire family, supporters of Trump and of his far-right policies, and with a singular dedication to impunity for the Israeli regime. And they have already begun a process of you know, as if U.S. media corporations weren't already biased enough in favor of Israel, they've already begun a process in CBS of purging it of anything that would be unfavorable to the Israeli regime, just as they've purchased TikTok, because they believe that young people actually seeing what's happening around the world is a threat to their control of the narrative. And our media across the board are under attack in this way. Individual figures that you mentioned, media corporations, social media, and now the one light that we had, which is independent media, people on social media, people who are not part of large corporations but are telling the truth, they are now under attack by the same forces and the same power. So that's why I say we have a duty to educate our neighbors. You know, it's very hard to judge a people who go along with wars of aggression and genocide and gross violations of human rights if they're watching Fox News and CNN and CBS and they're being told a completely different narrative, you know? So those of us who have access to the real information of what's happening, we have a duty to share that, to try to enlighten our neighbors. If we rely on CBS or now TikTok or CNN or Fox News, we are really headed down a very, very dark path. And so both sides of your point, I think, extremely well taken. One, the corruption of our institutions by billionaires is leading us down a very dark in terms of domestic policy, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of war and peace. And the other half of that, which is that our media, so-called, the media corporations in this country, are now a part of the problem. They, watch any one of those networks, from, Fox News on the right to, CNN, which is a very corporatist network, to MSNBC. They have never seen a war that they didn't love. And why is that? Is everybody involved just a deeply immoral warmonger? Or are there financial incentives that are feeding into the corporate model of media in this country? Maybe a little bit of both, but again, back to us. It's our duty to educate our neighbors. I don't know if somebody's modest. Should I just call on people? I don't. We'll just self-moderate.
Hi, my name is Mariam.
Hi, Mariam.
I was born Gafalabashi. Assalamu alaikum. My father is Persian. So my question is, some think of this war is Trump's war on Iran is unwinnable. Geographically and other ways, the U.S. has been in bed with the Shah, and after the revolution, a lot of changes happened, obviously. Biden tried to negotiate again, and they said, no, what if he comes back? And he's back.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion about this war going on right now?
In Iran?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a war that's been going on for a century. So, again, everything comes back to the media corporations in this country. If you listen to the narrative that is told about the war on Iran in the media, there are a few things that you never hear. You never hear about the 47-year campaign against Iran by the United States and its allies. You never hear about specific policies to starve the Iranian people, about the funding of terrorist groups in Iran to try to overthrow the government by the U.S. and the U.K. and others. You never hear about the intelligence operatives there trying to sow unrest and create disasters there. You never hear about the fact that a democratic government in Iran was overthrown by the CIA, that the United States installed the Shah of Iran, a brutal dictator who, imposed a reign of terror for the economic benefit of the West, but to the detriment of the Iranian people, having replaced their democratic government with this repressive dictator and buttressed him. Or that when the Iranian people overthrew that dictator with the Iranian Revolution and installed their own style of government, that since that time, the persecution of the Iranian people by the U.S. government, principally in league with the Israeli government and others in the West, has continued unabated. And what you never hear as well, and by the way, all of this for two purposes. One is for the economic domination of Western Asia by the US and the Israelis and the Brits. So that's the goal. And two, to make sure that there is no deterrent force in Western Asia that can control Israeli hegemony and military control of the region. I mean, that's a very high price for millions of Iranians to pay just for these illegitimate objectives on the part of governments like that in the US. Now, sometimes you will hear people say, yes, but human rights are violated in Iran. They are violated in Iran. They were violated in Iran under the regime that the US imposed on them, the Shah's dictatorship. The regime that the US would impose if it got away with it now would also be a very abusive dictatorial regime. And the current government in Iran also has serious human rights problems. But you do not bring reform by murdering the Iranian people, by slaughtering their schoolgirls, by bombing their bridges and their desalination, their water infrastructure, and their oil infrastructure, and their roads, and their hospitals, and their schools, all of which have been targeted in this war against the Iranian people. That's not how you bring about reform. Everybody knows that during war, things tighten up. It's not a moment of reform during war when the life of the nation is threatened. If you cared about human rights in Iran, first you would remove these brutal, unlawful sanctions imposed by the US. These are crimes that the US is perpetrating against the Iranian people. Secondly, you would pay reparations for what is a crime under international law. It's called aggression. The US-Israel attacks on Iran are the highest international crime. what the Nuremberg Tribunal called the supreme crime, aggression. And every act that they take to bomb again or attack something is an act of aggression. It's illegal. And that Iran has a right to defend itself under international law, just as any other country would have a right to defend itself in those circumstances. So don't let anyone ever tell you that the US is on the side of human rights. It is not. It is an oppressive force in Western Asia, Latin America, and beyond. And you want the Iranian people to do well, you leave them alone. You allow the Iranian people to have a voice. You do not murder them. This idea of bombs for human rights is a lie that's been perpetrated on Libya, on Lebanon, on Syria, on too many places to mention is now being perpetrated on Iran. This war is a crime.
What about the Taliban? What about the terrorist groups that, spring up within these nations?
Yeah. Yeah, what happens when a country is destabilized is that, armed groups are, so you say terrorist, it's a term that's used very much in this country. I think we should do some unpacking. First of all, in international law, groups that arm themselves to fight against foreign occupation, colonial domination, or racist regimes are not terrorists. They are legitimate fighters who have a right to resist against those forces. Many of the groups that are called terrorist by the US government are not recognized as terrorists by the rest of the world. They're condemned as such because they threaten the US and its allies who are imposing these situations on them. There are terrorists. In fact, the US has been supporting terrorist groups inside of Iran for decades. So these are just separatist groups and political opponents armed by the US and the Israelis and others in order to sow unrest by attacking people. So in international humanitarian law, there are two categories: combatants and non-combatants, and then there are the rules. And the judgments that we make should be based upon these objective factors, not upon, dismissing someone as a terrorist, whatever the case may be. But, let's take Syria. You had a legitimate protest in Syria against economic hardship, by the way, created in part by the United States with its sanctions and its interference with the Syrian economy. But you had legitimate protest in before the Syrian war, where the people rose up because they were deeply unsatisfied by their economic situation. The government began to repress that brutally, and up until that point, it was domestic unrest and a heavy-handed response by the government. Then the Americans and the Israelis and the Brits and the French and the Turks and everybody else got involved, and they all picked a group and armed them and said, now you fight it out. And they created a horror. In the first months of the Civil War, the UN was there with its highest mediators, people like Kofi Annan and Lakhdar Brahimi, with workable peace plans that were rejected by all of these other countries. By the Americans, by the Brits, by the Israelis, by the Iranians, by everybody, were rejected because everybody wanted their side to win. And we ended up with this, this disintegration and every group being armed, including, bona fide terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, whose purpose is not liberation, whose purpose is something much more dark. And so again, US meddling in Western Asia has brought nothing but misery and violence. The Taliban were, and by the way, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan were created by the CIA. They were created as the so-called mujahideen to fight against the Soviet Union when the Soviets were occupying Afghanistan. They were funded by the CIA, they were armed by the CIA, they were encouraged by the CIA, and even after the Soviet withdrawal, they continued to support them for shenanigans in the region. And they ultimately, here's another kind of boomerang, right? Our investments in violence abroad are gonna come home sooner or later, So I think it's a very good point. We need the rule of law, and for the rule of law, we need an absence of war. And for an absence of war, we need to control our own government, which is seeding wars all around the globe. Yes, sir.
One opinion and then one question.
Yeah.
Democracy. I find it rather ironic that we're this 250th year anniversary celebration, and it should be so promoted.
It's not working. It's not working. It is on, but it's not.
Is this working?
It's not amplifying, though.
I can assure you the opinion. I find it ironic that we are at the 250th celebration of the founding of the United States. Democracy should be celebrated. Democracy is a wonderful thing. The question that we started with was about where's the money going? And that is a kleptocracy, not a democracy. You all know the word kleptomaniac? Well, just shift that particular noun to a kleptocracy. Steal all you can, get it for yourself, and we are moving rather rapidly towards a kleptocracy. The question, U.S. aid program. The U.S. aid program, I always thought, was one of the finest things America ever did, and it's now been decimated by this particular administration. Where does it stand? What can you tell us about recent attempts to either reincorporate it or to revive it? What do you know, sir?
Yeah. Well, I mean, USAID is one of those parts of the federal government that's been very much under attack since Donald Trump took power again. They've been systematically dismantling, defunding USAID, starting with programs that are not consistent with the political ideology of the Trump MAGA ruling group. And that's devastating. You know, USAID has a mixed record. On the one hand, USAID has saved lives. It has provided vaccines and food and humanitarian assistance and aid and development assistance, all those sorts of things that are really fundamental and can save lives. On the other hand, it's been used also as a tool of the intelligence agencies, of the CIA and others to meddle in foreign governments, to support its own agendas for those governments as opposed to, so it has a very mixed bag. But this just sort of complete dismantling of the humanitarian side of USAID cost lives. And I think you're right to say follow the money. You know, you have diplomacy is being defunded. Peacemaking is being defunded, right? Humanitarian aid is being defunded. International agencies that deal with health, like WHO, that deal with human rights, that deal with humanitarian assistance, that deal with development and the combating of poverty around the world, those are all being not just defunded by the US, but attacked by the US. And the money is then being channeled into private gain, private sector actors that are being given lucrative contracts for very questionable deals by the federal government, to billions of dollars, now tens of billions of dollars, going every year to the Israeli regime to carry out its genocide and other crimes in Palestine, to wars against Iran and Yemen and you name it. I mean, Donald Trump has now the record in the history, the 250-year history of the United States, for having bombed more countries than any president in history. And that's saying something, I can tell you. 7 countries have fallen under US bombs under the presidency of Donald Trump. We're number one. And these are massively expensive. These are, they're not throwing grenades. They're throwing multi-million-dollar cruise missiles and so on in the process. So, drive down Main Street and look at the deprivation and then think about our tax dollars being funneled into the pockets of billionaires, into the war machine, and to the murderous regimes all around the world for ideological purposes. And it's an ugly ideology. And in the past, I've hesitated to use the F word, fascism. But I don't hesitate anymore, because if you read history, you begin to understand these patterns, and I think it's important that we're awake. Is that? I feel bad because I'm not paying attention to the crowds. I never know who to call first.
I agree with everything you've said. Your eloquence is amazing. I was a bit shocked when I think my depression certainly has deepened listening to all of this. I know a lot of this. You have so eloquently shared, and I agree with everything you're saying. I was shocked, though, when I maybe misheard. I feel like you suggested that I have a couple of sources of news that I think I can rely on. NPR was one of them. You kind of indicated that there aren't any, and when you were critical of both parties, we're saddled with this system. How are we possibly going to have a chance to change if we don't support the Democrats? I am very aware of the many, many, many mistakes and disappointments. But moving forward, I'm a very practical person. I want to know, I am heartened by the fact that you think there's hope. But frankly, I'm not sure there is, based on what I'm hearing. And again, because I agree with what you're saying, but I was shocked when you dismissed both our parties, especially since we're stuck with this system. To me, the only thing we can do now is support the Democrats, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, you know, my area of expertise is not domestic political tactics. And I think it's a very personal choice about whether we vote Republican in hopes of getting moderate Republicans in, whether we vote Democrat in hopes of getting principled Democrats in, whether we vote third party like the Greens or the Libertarians, whether we vote for independents who are unaffiliated with any of these parties. I mean, I think that's a very personal choice that people have to wrestle with. And I know it's not an easy one, you know, but I also know that there was no more enthusiastic supporter of the genocide in Palestine than Joe Biden. I mean, he wasn't just accidentally supporting. Yeah. So we, you know, if we look to the Democratic Party as a source of hope, as something that's going to advance our values, we have to be disruptors of the Democratic Party. We have to say that if you are only an extension, and this I can say with great confidence, 95% of the elected Democrats in the Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, belong to donors. Democrats and Republicans, both. They belong to donors. And so whether we think they are the lesser evil, and I have a lot of trouble with that, voting for the lesser evil, because we know by function of logic that the lesser evil is evil. And voting for evil that is literally going to cause suffering to human beings, because they are not as extremely evil as the other party, tells us there's something wrong with the system. And there's a question we have to wrestle with. If we participate in that system, are we not reinforcing it, you know? So I get enthusiastic when I see outliers elected within the two-party system who don't toe the line of the donors and who are principled in the positions they take. So I say this, if you want to find hope in the Democratic Party or any other party, engage with that party and push them like hell to do the right thing, because they're not doing the right thing, you know? It's the big items. I'm going to shut up with this answer in 1 second, but, you know, as I said, both of those parties support neoliberal economics that cause massive deprivations to our societies, massive inequalities, growing poverty, and so on. Both of them support neoconservative foreign policy, both of those parties. U.S. exceptionalism, you know, all of these kinds of horrors, blank check support for the Israeli regime. All of these sort of things that are costing us, that are causing great suffering, are Republican-Democrat shared sins. Whatever institution you engage with, if it's the Democrats, I think the moral duty is to push them to do the right thing and not just to become cannon fodder for an organization that is. Noam Chomsky once said that the most dangerous organization in the history of the world is the Republican Party of the United States. And I say, if that's true, the second most dangerous organization in the history of the world is the Democratic Party.
So what would you say? We should just not vote?
No, I think, you know, I see change happening. I've seen people vote change in. I think if you leave it to voting and you leave it into a system that's controlled by these two co-opted and corrupted parties, you're not going to see the kind of change that's necessary in an existential moment of threat that we're facing now.
The only solution I can think of
Yeah.
is to kick them on the alley
that'd be an important step.
I fully believe that one day that may occur, but it will not be within my bounds.
Yeah, I mean, again, I say that's up to us. I think that's up to us. You know, I've seen some important things. I've seen some initiatives just in the last 5 years that have been exposing the sources of the money going to politicians. Well, the most recent example is AIPAC. AIPAC has become poison chalice. They will give you millions of dollars. They will do smear campaigns against your opponent. But now they've become, if somebody knows that you're funded by AIPAC, you take a blow in the polls. And that's what we have to do. We have to make the pharmaceutical lobby and the war lobby and the Israel lobby and all of these destructive multi-billionaire forces, we have to make them toxic to being elected. And that's not going to come from the politicians. That can only come from us.
The only thing that will make that is for the actual Congress itself to adopt.
No, don't wait for them.
I do believe that one day that that as a human species, we continue to evolve, and I strongly believe that each generation is better than the other, is better than the one before. Because
Let's hope.
the species
Well, let's hope.
continue to evolve. I
Yeah.
believe in that.
Yeah.
But I believe that one day that we will evolve to that.
I hope.
My question is, why is it left to those of us in the street to deal with this horror? Where have the powerful people who agree with us disappeared? It's, as you say, a lot of them have been bought, but is it unusual that a lot of them are physically threatened? I mean, judges, families are attacked and so on. Is that unusual? Yeah. And is that a truly inhibiting factor in the powerful who could be leading us? I think it's pathetic that it's up to us in the streets with one vote.
I think that's very well said. And I really believe we're living in an age of cowardice. We see everybody on their knees it's absurd to watch the demands that are being made on people, which are illegitimate demands, and on institutions, and you expect them to stand up for principle, and one by one our institutions have just caved. From our universities to our state governments, our local governments, just across the board, one by one, they have caved. And that's why I say, if we're waiting for a savior to come from above, I fear we will be waiting a long time or entirely in vain. And that's why I put my hope in the people. Not in the institutions, they're gone. All of those so-called liberal institutions that protected our rights, they've been weakened and dismantled over time one by one. And now it's up to us, or we can just silently march forward into the dark future that they are constructing for us. And, it's a question of character. Some people aren't able to do that.
First, I want to thank you for being here today. I saw you were a Niagara Falls High School graduate. I didn't realize that. Thank you for coming.
My teacher.
Oh, Marge is your teacher? Thank you, Marge, for bringing him here, and thank you for coming home to here. I don't know where home is for you now, but we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And on that note, and as you mentioned, our duty to educate our neighbors and friends and whatnot, I'm going to take that challenge and speak to the fact that community rights, our local rights, are where we have our power. And all of this is super overwhelming to us as we think about the world. But to your point of it's being brought home here, this country, as, colonized as it was supposedly founded on local rights based off Haudenosaunee practices in some aspects, which I think we all need to tune into.
That's true.
And UNDRIP and all these other components of the UN are models for us to look to. So as we sit here in Niagara Falls, let's make it personal to us right now. And I'll make it personal in the way that we have been sitting on poisonous ground for over 80 years since World War II. As we sit on top of radioactive waste and toxic Love Canal waste, and all of that is coming up right now. And the EPA and the DEC are doing their same old game. The government, we look to them to say, save us. They're not going to save us. They didn't save us with Love Canal. That was the tip of the iceberg while they hid all the rest. They separated out the radioactive waste and didn't tell us about that back then, because guess what? Super funds are funded by our tax dollars, and then they have to go back and sue the companies. But guess what? With the Manhattan Project, with all those companies, they signed agreements to say you will not be held accountable for this radioactive material you're producing as part of our war effort. So they can't go sue them. So awareness of our history, the fact that we cannot rely on our government to save us from living on top. We are World War II victims. We are, Agent Orange was produced here. We have waste from dioxin. All of that, we're like literally sitting on top of it. And it's a real hard reality to come to terms with. But at the end of the day, we have to think of it from a local perspective. And what can we do? And so I don't say all of this to leave us hopeless, but let me tell you what we can do. I'm working on, and we probably shouldn't publish this, but I'm working on some rights of nature, community rights legislation locally here. And I will be glad as things unfold to ensure you all are informed on how we push our local city council and our local area to be accountable, because human rights are nature's rights. We can't, the earth will be here long after we're gone. Why do you think we want to go live on Mars or something? Right? And then the last component of this, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of on a soapbox, but I do have a question, is that, there's a data center supposedly that's going to be built here by this company called Urbicon. Does anybody know where Urbicon is based? Qatar. So back to your points of Israel and, the wrong people being involved, and it's an AI data center involved in collecting information on us. It's going to be built right here in our backyard if we don't stand up and say, you know what, the first round of industrial waste that we sit on top of still isn't cleaned up. Why are we going to welcome more? Not to mention now, industrial waste isn't just the physical, radiological slag that sits here. It's also the AI intelligence that's being collected by foreign governments on us. That right there, yes. So as an attorney, as we think about, so rights of nature is giving nature legal standing, which I think is amazing. But we as citizens have less standing than corporations in courts. And we've seen corporations win out against humans and individuals repeatedly due to the money. As a legal scholar or, expert, what is your advice when it comes to legal standing and the court systems currently today? And can we truly rely on them as a tool for uprising, rebellion, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, absolutely. As a lawyer with some humility, I have to say that the law is not going to save us all on its own, But it is an important tool. I think Martin Luther King said, the law cannot stop another man from hating me, but it can stop him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty good. I think he said, So it is a very valuable tool, and communities all around the world are using the law to challenge the kinds of environmental harms that are threatening the nature around them, threatening their own well-being and health, and threatening future generations as well. And in Niagara Falls, we understand that concept very well. Having, now dealing with the acts of private sector actors from decades and even a century ago here in Niagara Falls. So I do believe that the law is a very valuable tool. But not on its own. I'm old enough to remember when the revelations on Love Canal were happening, the very inadequate and slow response of the local government, of the state government, of the federal government, even of the media in the beginning. And it was ordinary people who mobilized and took legal action in addition to political action that got them some modicum of redress. And I say a modicum of redress because how do you compensate somebody for, birth defects and non-communicable diseases and neurological ailments and all of these things that didn't just happen to you. They were done to you for somebody else's profit, which is very much the history of Niagara Falls as well. And that's where the law can be a valuable tool. That requires organization as well because it requires resources. And, these corporations have billion-dollar legal departments. And, an ordinary person here in the Falls doesn't. So that requires people to come together, I think, on this basis. And I hope people will mobilize against this data center. I was absolutely dumbfounded that there was partial rubber stamping of the first step toward a data center in downtown Niagara Falls with all of its implication for environmental harms, for noise, for consuming public resources and giving nothing to us in return, producing very little jobs once it's born, like a half a dozen jobs, once it's built, half a dozen jobs maybe. It is very reminiscent of the kinds of deals that were given to private sector actors when the chemical companies saw our water and our hydroelectric power and moved in and were given everything. Devastated the environment and then pulled up stakes and left us with an economically devastated community. You would think we would learn some lessons from that, so hopefully we will. But yeah, I'm a humble lawyer. The law can help, but it's not going to do it alone. We have to mobilize politically as well. Yeah.
I'm grateful to the bottom of my heart for
No problem. I'm grateful from the bottom of my heart from you being here today, because you have an informed viewpoint that I think it is super important for people, especially people of goodwill, like you used to hear. And the most important thing that I think you said is that both parties are complicit in this. And the one thing that I've found, I've been I came from a Catholic background, I fought my way out of that, but the most important reason that I'm at a UU church is the freedom to use my mind, But one of the things that I've found excessive, because I'm really interested in political activism, I had to take a break from it for a while because it drove me crazy trying to rally the right sort of support. Because the right sort of support cannot rubber stamp what the Democratic Party does. The one thing that I find really frustrating, have found really frustrating about UUs, and I'm glad you opened the door to this conversation, is I'm allowed to be skeptical about the existence of God. I'm not allowed to be skeptical about the goodness of the Democratic Party. And that really bothers me, because I think any true analysis that really cuts to the chase, that really gives a basis for organizing resistance, is resistance to both corrupt parties. And that is not easy, because you come to questions like lesser evil voting. I had a scheme that I was unable to rally support for, but the idea was, choke back your vomit and vote for Biden.
Yeah.
But I'm serious about that, that the very act of voting, the very act of rejecting Trump was also a rejection of the man you're electing and saying, we're not going to put up with your bullshit. And, I don't think we get anywhere unless we start to think along these lines, and I'm really glad that you opened up the basis for an honest discussion. And I wanted to emphasize, what you know about the complicity of both parties, because I think that is the most important thing you said today.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thank you. I would just say one thing about that, which is we have to begin with the realization that they don't represent us. And one may be more polite and less openly racist, or these are important things, but they're not representing our interest. And I think once we recognize that, you can pick your own tactic. Be a dissident within one of those parties and try to bring in, to purge it of its corruption and to bring in people who are going to make change, or work outside that party. Whatever it is, I think we're all obliged to try to.
I wanted to add one thing related, because I think this, this goes to the question of political strategy and tactics. Something like the No Kings movement, for example. I think what happened. People but okay, going back. I think what you brought up about the corruption of both parties and the relative immovability of both parties is important for the question of political strategizing. Because, for example, something like the No Kings movement, which has, on the face of it, its own kind of legitimacy, is so easily co-opted into a pro-Democrat, anti-Trump thing. It's just another chance for the Democrats to say, we're better than Trump. Yeah, you're better than Trump, but you're still fucking lousy. And anyway, that's...
Yeah, I will agree with you that we need change that's much more fundamental than either of the parties are offering, and I leave the tactics to the tacticians.
And we do have coffee downstairs. If anybody wants to come down afterwards to continue this discussion, downstairs we have coffee and we have food. And I think Marshall's going to close with the chalice.
Thank you. It is. No, you're very kind. I always appreciate that conversation. Okay.
Craig, thank you for offering us both truth and hope this morning. Your perspective helps us see more clearly the challenges facing our world and the responsibilities we share as people of conscience. We're deeply grateful for your presence, your wisdom, and your lifelong dedication to human rights. Thank you very much. Are there any announcements?
And I did want to mention that Craig will be coming back, if he doesn't remember, December 20th, he'll be coming back for another discussion. I think somebody else had an announcement? It'll be a happy talk. I'm sorry?
Oh, me and my girl have an arrangement for you guys, the sound of music that we've been working on.
Okay, when we'll sing the chalice and then we'll have a musical interlude. Okay, thank you.
Craig has reminded us that our world is woven together, that the suffering of one people touches us all. As we go forth, may we hold that truth close. May we nurture compassion here so that we can extend it outward, across borders and boundaries. Let us leave today with renewed commitment to justice, dignity, and the shared humanity that binds us. Bill, could I ask you please to extinguish the chalice while we read the written words? We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you all again for attending. We look forward to continuing fellowship today during coffee hour downstairs. See you there.
Joe's going to play a piece of music for us. Is that correct, Joe?
Is he playing piano? Yep, he is. All right. I got the piano ready. What would you like that? Good morning, everyone. So, me and my grandpa have been working on an arrangement from The Sound of Music. So we hope you enjoy. That's okay.
life